Dylan from Throttle Company in Columbus, Ohio, and this should look familiar to you guys. It's a 1967 Royal Enfield Continental GT250.
Mecum.
All right, so the reason I said this should look familiar, obviously we're a Royal Enfield dealer, and we sell a lot of Continental GT 650s. And this is the whatever, great-grandfather, whatever, the ancestor, whatever relation you want to use, sort of the original GT. And it was originally a 250. It was a single way up until recently. I guess it would be 2019 where it became a twin. But it's a cafe racer, and it's from the 60s, and it's from the factory as a cafe racer. So, you know, this is how it looks stock. It wasn't modified to be a cafe racer as they were doing at the time. This was from Royal Enfield as a cafe racer, and it was kind of an entry-level young person's sort of boy racer sporty bike. And it was also, they had graduated license, which they still have in Europe. But basically, this was the bike you could get if you had just got your license and you wanted to be sporty and you weren't going to be kind of a stodgy old man bike. This was for the young kids. Which is funny because however many years later, Royal Enfield is doing exactly that same thing. This is a really nice example. This is very stock. This is one that there are Royal Enfields are rare, especially at this time, that to have survived. And I guess that's part of it, right? This is sort of a starter bike at the day, so nobody held on to it. And they become rare, but what you can use this bike for is sort of reference to say, this is definitely how the seat was. This is how the taillight looked. This is how the tank was when it was new. And that makes this bike pretty important to be able to look at and say, all right, I can't find an original exhaust. All I have is photos. But we can sit here and we can look at this and see how it looks. Something to notice, of course, it's kind of clip-on bars. It definitely is clip-on bars. But you still have this Royal Enfield famous nacelle where all the gauges are built into this beautiful piece of aluminum. I mean, the craftsmanship at the time, now we would just say, that's too expensive to produce. But back then, this was an icon. This was Royal Enfield's thing to do these beautiful dash nacelles that cover the forks and everything. Obviously minimalistic controls and gauges and all that stuff, but beautiful, very classy, especially by today's standards. Something you don't have is a side stand. We have a 250 Crusader that's a 66, so it's very similar motorcycle as this, but it's not the sporty version, it's sort of the gentleman's version, but it also doesn't have a side stand. At the time, especially a light bike, they were just thinking you hop off, you kind of balance, and then you put it on the center stand, and that's just how it is. Plus, it's kick only, of course, and right side shift, and you're going to kick it, so why not just put it on the center stand? That makes the whole process of owning it and living with it a lot easier. This in particular, so if you're talking about buying this to ride, it's got a fiberglass tank. In the day, that really didn't matter. Today, if you put modern ethanol fuel in this, or fuel containing ethanol, man, it's not going to like that fiberglass. It's just going to eat right through it. You're going to have all kinds of problems. So that's something you would have to address, either the world's strictest diet on zero ethanol fuel, or a coating or some kind of bladder system. You definitely would have to address that first. But other than that, the fact that this is not a modern bike in terms of like speed and braking performance and those kind of things, but you could ride this around the city. You could take this to bike nights and things like that. This would be a very fun bike to show up and have people try to guess how old it was and guess what it was. I think earlier, Zach's doing the camera, and I think he zoomed in on this, made in England. This is, at this point in time, they were definitely making motorcycles in India. They're all currently made in India. A few years after this, actually, they sort of half shut down production in this year. So 67, they shut down a lot of their British production. They continued making motorcycles until 1970 in England, but you do have this time where they're sort of competing with themselves to say, this is a British Royal Enfield, because there's non-British Royal Enfields out there. So very cool motorcycle, obviously something I love and love the style of, and I love the heritage, because we do vintage bikes and we do Royal Enfields, and we love vintage Royal Enfields.
Mecum.
And now for 4,000, you're going to get 5,000, you're going to get 6,000, you're going to get 5, 6.